Hey everybody, Pat Kelly here of Mad River Outfitters, and welcome to another fly tying tutorial. Today we're going to be tying a version of Blaine Chocolate's Feather Game Changer. It's actually a mini feather jerk changer. So Blaine Chocolate introduced to us sometime last year, I believe, the jerk changer platform, and it's something that we have toyed around with a lot here at the shop. Really enjoy tying. They're super fun to fish. You know, this year for me personally, we had a lot of low clear water that we had to deal with. So I started playing around with some smaller streamers and downsizing things. And this mini feather jerk changer has been super productive for me this year. Super fun fly to fish. So we do already have a video on the feather game changer, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. We're just going to jump right in and tie it. One quick note I'll make about the jerk changer. Dev will put a link below here maybe, or over there somewhere, of Blaine's video about the jerk changer. There's a couple of, I guess properties, if you will, that makes a fly a jerk changer. It's essentially what you're shooting for is the front half of the fly should be one section and should be approximately one half the length of the overall fly. So just keep that in mind. As long as you're using that basic principle, you can kind of adapt that to really any size or type of streamer that you want to. So we're going to dive right in. We're going to start out with the thread I'm using is a 6/0 Vivus in white that I like to use on these feather changers. It's just a super strong thread, really, really fine too. I like that it doesn't build up too quickly because it is so small in diameter. We have a articulated fish spine tail shank here in the vise, and the feather that we're going to use today on a majority of the pattern is from Whiting. It's in their American Hen Saddle line. This is a wild gray. You can use virtually any color you want, but the color scheme that we're doing today is kind of a shad, minnow shiner type coloration. As far as the tail goes, you can kind of, like you've seen in a lot of our videos, you can do hackle tips if you want. You can use marabou. There's all sorts of different ways to do it. Lately, I've been tying these smaller flies with some of the it's almost like chickaboo or small marabou feathers that you find at the base of your hen saddle. They work really, really well. I like to use one kind of on each side of the shank. Just kind of helps fill the fly out and proportionally works well. One's just not quite enough, so two seems to be just about right. So go ahead and lay that guy right up on the near side of the shank, and then just kind of walk your thread back from the eye, tying that in there. And then we'll just repeat the process on the other side. Try your best to get your tail to match up so that they're the same length. Flash is totally optional. I'm not going to worry about flash right now because I can't find it. So we're going to go flashless, I believe. Yep, flashless for sure. All right. Now, like almost all of your game changers, there's going to be a prop and there's going to be a veil material. The prop that we're going to start out with is Chocolate's finesse chenille. This is the small size. This color is white, or maybe it's clear, but it is the smaller of the two sizes that you want to start with. As we progress, we'll transition into the larger material. All right, so we will kind of lock that in as far back on the shank as you can. And we don't want too much lift on our feather when we go to wrap it after this stage, so you don't really want to have too much of this prop material in the first couple of sections. So I try to minimize it to just a couple of wraps on this prop here. So get that tied in, just do a couple of wraps, clean things up. kind of trim away your excess. And then now for the first set of feathers, just like we did in the feather game changer, all of those principles apply. So we're going to start with the smallest feathers that you can find. Typically speaking, at the top of your saddle is where you're going to find your smaller, narrower feathers, I should say. That's really what you're looking for, is the narrower feathers. And then as you progress up the fly and as you go through the fly, you're just going to work your way down the saddle. As the feathers get wider and larger, that's going to create the taper naturally for you as you're tying it. All right, looks like I have a couple of feathers already selected here. Now on this set, because it's going to be the smallest out of all of them, I'm going to only use 2 hen saddles. So you're going to want to pick 2 out, try to match them up as best as you can, and then strip away all of that fluff and stuff at the base. We don't really want any of that in this part of the fly at all. So get that stripped away as best you can. And then start at the tip there, kind of preen all these fibers down. Just kind of helps you prep the feather before you tie it in. Go ahead and lock that guy in there. And I like to kind of wet my fingers, and as I'm wrapping or palmering these feathers forward, I'll kind of just take my fingertips and just sweep those fibers backwards, just ensuring that I'm not trapping anything as I'm moving forward. So kind of bring that all the way forward there, and we will tie that off. Looks good. Whip finish and move on to our next shank here. Add a little bit of glue. All right, our next shank's going to be a 10 mil fish spine. Go ahead and drop that guy in there before you take that previous section out of the vise. That'll save yourself a lot of trouble. All right. Get that mounted in there. When you are tying game changers, virtually any game changer, doesn't matter which one it is, for the most part, you want to tie as far back on the shank as you can when you're working with these game changers. So what that does is it minimizes the gap that you'll have in your finished product. So if you look at, kind of by design, I tied this one so that you can see there's a huge gap there between the hook and the next shank there. And you can also see that most of that loop is completely exposed. So you want to try to avoid that if you can. So if you tie all the way back up, almost closing that loop up entirely, it's going to minimize the gap at least as much as possible when you're tying that fly. So it'll keep your finished product looking nice and clean. The other thing that does is it also will help the fly foul a lot less frequently, because it will still allow the previous section to wiggle and swim efficiently, but it'll also prevent it from swinging all the way forward and possibly fouling around the front hook. If you want to pro it up, you got to avoid the dangling, if at all possible. All right, next. So we're also going to stick with the smaller size of the finesse chenille for this size, or for this section rather. One thing I like to do is I kind of like to, if you can see here, I'll hold it up. I like to trim away some of those fibers, probably my OCD more than anything, but if you trim away those fibers and expose that core, it makes tying in the material a lot cleaner and neater. And I find it to be helpful, especially on these smaller shanks that are only 8 and 10 millimeters long. It's helpful to keep that tie-in point nice and clean. So All right. Now, if you remember on the previous shank, we did 2 wraps, I believe it was. On this one, we're going to try to go 1 more. So try to get 3 full wraps of this prop material. And just by increasing the amount of prop, just by 1 wrap, is going to help our feathers just stick up a little bit more on this shank. So always keeping in mind taper throughout the entire process. Anytime you're building one of these flies, it's helpful to not cut your thread, but also to keep that taper in mind as you're building it. So as I've just shown, if you're not careful, where the bottom part of that shank comes around, that edge is really, really sharp. So if you're not careful with your thread, you can definitely cut it once or twice or 3 times or whatever it was. All right. So just keep in mind, like I said, kind of work down the saddle as you're tying the fly. By doing that, your feathers are going to get slightly wider as you progress through the pattern, kind of taking care of that taper for you. So just remember where your previous set came from. We did 2 on the last one. On this one, we're going to jump up to 3, just so things can kind of start to fill out and get a little bit fuller. So kind of go through and just find 3 good ones. I feel like all of my flies are the messiest. Do you agree, Deb? All right. Go ahead and walk those feathers forward. Make sure you take the time to kind of sweep all those fibers back as you're wrapping forward, just so you're not, or at least keeping the trapping of materials to a minimum. All right, now we are going to move on to the hook. So unlike the other feather game changer video that we have, this is just going to be a single hook pattern. So it's going to be situated kind of dead in the middle. The hook that we are using is going to be the Ahrex SA280 minnow hook. It's a short shank, wide gap, really, really stellar hook. I've grown to like this hook a lot. I think when the first time I tied this pattern, I used the Ahrex Gammarus, which we use a lot in our game changers, but I've kind of evolved into using this hook specifically. It's very similar in the way that it's built. It just has a slightly heavier wire diameter to it, so when you're going to reef on a heavier fish, or don't have to worry about it bending out on you. I also like that it has a really, really nice eye, if you can see. There we go, perfect. So they work really, really well with shanks. They just move freely, but really, really solid hook. All right, so we're going to start our thread kind of at the back there. Walk it forward. The wire that we are using is the Scientific Anglers. It's a 1x7 stainless steel wire. It comes in 2 sizes, a 24 thousandths and a 28 thousandths. I'm using the 24 thousandths, the smaller of the 2 on this pattern. Just works a little bit better with these smaller hooks. Got a piece, looks like pre-cut right here. So what I like to do is I'll start that wire right up behind the eye, and don't have to worry about getting it perfect just yet. We're just going to kind of walk that wire back, or your thread back rather, to kind of find the see if I can turn that so you can see perfect, right about where the shank starts to meet the bend. Right as that bend kind of begins to descend downward, you want to stop right about there. So what we'll do is we will slide our previous sections on the back of the wire and up through. Every hook's a little bit different too, so depending on what hook you're using, that point might change. One thing I'll show you when we get this tied in here, the whole goal of the wire is when you get it tied in is you want it to be in line, at least as best as you can, in line with the eye of the hook. If you can see, perfect, you can see. You can kind of see the loop of this wire here that we've created is pretty darn close to being perfectly in line with the eye of that hook. That'll just help ensure that that fly swims and tracks really well in the water. And you want it just open enough to where this is going to swing and move freely. If that loop is too big, you'll find that those sections will loop around and foul way more. And so it can be avoided just by keeping that loop nice and tight. So bring that thread all the way forward, nice tight touching wraps. Preferably you have some wire cutters, not your fly tying scissors, to cut your wire. So on this hook here, I kind of go back and forth with this, but what we're going to try to do is we're going to shoot for 2 stations. So what I mean by that is you're going to have a set, basically. You're going to have a prop and a veil, a prop and a veil. Kind of personal preference. I'm sure the fish don't care, but for some reason, because this shank length is so much longer than the length of the previous shanks, if you just do one station where you just have like one prop and a veil, for some reason aesthetically, it just doesn't look right to me. So, but play around with it, kind of do what you think works best and what you like. So, but we're going to shoot for 2. It's going to be a lot in that small space, but we're going to give it a go. Sticking with medium here, or I'm sorry, the smaller size on the Chocolate's Finesse chenille. Tight touching wraps. We're going to this prop to kind of get a little bit taller and a little bit denser as we progress forward. Again, just that's gonna help us achieve the taper that we want in the fly. The other cool thing about this material is the core itself kind of has a little bit of an elastic property to it. So as you're wrapping that material, if you reef on it and pull a little bit tighter on it, you'll see that the tighter you pull on that prop material, those fibers will stand up a little bit more. You might be able to see that in the camera there, but when you put a lot of pressure on it, it wants to stand up nice and tight. So make sure as you're wrapping that forward, you do your best to put as much pressure on that prop material as possible. All right, bring that thread back. Move on down the saddle here. And we're going to pick 3 more. A lot of rinse and repeat here in this fly. We're not really going to change or do anything different until we get up to the head of the fly. So I'll show you one of these feathers here. When you're cleaning them, try to get all of that fluff off of the lower part of the stem there. I don't really like to include any of that in my flies. You know, if I put it anywhere, I'll do it once I get all the way up to the head of the fly, or maybe my last station of feathers, just to add a little bit of bulk. But in the rear, you know, 3/4 of really any feather changer, I don't like to include any of that material there. I just think it weighs the fly down and adds a lot of unnecessary bulk. I also like to keep a little wire brush close to my vise, and when I'm wrapping these feathers, sometimes the fibers of the feather just have a tendency of sticking together. So if you have a little wire brush, you can just kind of brush them out and keep your fly looking nice. All right, so we'll move up just a little bit, and then we're going to start that second station here. So this is going to also be the last station where we're going to use the smaller finesse chenille. After this section here, we're going to switch to the larger size. Brush that out. Looking good. A little more super glue. You take the time to tie these game changer flies. You want to make sure they stay together and catch a lot of fish. Now we are going to move to our front shank and the final section of the fly. So I'm going to show you two different options here. Kind of played around with both of these. The way I did it originally was with the 35 millimeter shank from Flyman, and that's what I'll use today, just because that's what I did the very first time I tied this fly was use this one. But I've also started playing around with the 25 millimeter articulated fish spine, so just slightly shorter. When I use this one, I tend to scale everything down. It's already a pretty small fly, at least by my standards. You know, when I drop down to using this 25, I'll use 2 8 mils in the back, and then I'll drop down to like a size 8, middle hook, and that'll scale everything back. And I think I have. Here's one of the full-size flies. This one's been beat up and abused in my box for a while, but this is the size of the one we're doing right now. And then you'll see this guy here is just a little bit shorter. So if I can do a side-by-side. Can you see that? There we go. So play around with it. Like I said, today we're going to be doing the 35 mil version just because it's kind of what I did first. That back in there. So the tricky part when you're tying on this 35, or when you jump to this 35 mil, is do your very best to situate that shank as far out onto the tip of your vise as possible, exposing as much of that loop as possible. That way you can bring your thread all the way back here. Again, watch that little burr. Those wires are sharp. One thing you can do too is if you build up a little bit of thread here on this section here, it makes it a little bit easier to walk that thread up the loop. I also find that I'll pull a little bit of thread off of my bobbin here, and if I just lessen the pressure just a little bit and I turn my vise to the side, it's a little bit easier to walk that thread all the way up and close that gap up. So just a couple little tricks to make that easier, but I'll bring that all the way back, go a little bit further. And then one thing I like to do before I continue is I'll put a little drop of super glue on those thread wraps, and that'll just make sure that those wraps don't come sliding back down when we're tying the fly. All right. Now we are going to move on to the larger size of Chocolate's finesse chenille. Tie that as far back as you can. Can be a little bit tricky at first, but the more you do it, it'll get easier tying this far back on the shanks. But having a good vise makes a big difference. All right, so you can see now we're at about the shoulder point of the fly, maybe midway point, and we're about halfway through. I just took this clump of feathers. I don't know if you can see that. Probably not. Try this camera. We're about halfway through the fly, and I took this clump of feathers from about halfway down the saddle. So just always keep that in the back of your head. You're just going to progress down the saddle as you're tying this fly, and then Mother Nature takes care of the tapering for you. Same stuff, different section, man. All right, so now what I like to do is I'm just going to skip, or I'm just going to jump maybe a half a dozen wraps or so forward. When I start this next station, I don't want to butt it right up in front of this previous station, so I kind of want to give the appearance that there are, two shanks almost. Even though you're tying on one, you want to give yourself a little bit of a gap there. So we're going to do, like I said, I don't know, maybe a quarter of an inch. We're going to move forward and repeat the process again. Now, one thing that I like to do here, this is completely optional, and I do this with a lot of my game changers. One thing I like to do to just add a little bit more support, and I think it adds to the longevity of the fly. It also helps the fly maintain its shape a little bit better over time, is when I get to about the shoulder point in the fly or up to the head, one thing that I like to do is I will add a little bit of, there's a couple different things you can use. You can use liquid fusion, which is a really great glue. It's a water-based glue, but it is very flexible once it sets up. It's not a light cured resin, so if you don't have a light, the liquid fusion is a great option. The other thing that you can do is use any of the light cured resins that have a flex to them. So I'll just take and I'll apply a little bit of flex kind of evenly around the fly. Not much, just a little bit. And then I'll just kind of take my fingers and work that resin into the material there slightly. And then, whoop. Oh, I got the new light. And all that does, it just adds a little bit of rigidity to your prop. If you didn't put it on there, the fly would be perfectly fine, but I think the fly will have a little bit longer lifespan to it. It just won't flatten out quite as quick if you put that flexible resin on there. All right, so now we're going to be up to probably about the largest point in the fly, so you're going to try to go and cherry pick through these feathers as best as you can to find the largest ones. With those larger, longer feathers too, one thing that it's helpful to do once you get those feathers tied in and wrapped all the way forward and tied off is take your thread and just kind of go back over the feathers just with a couple of wraps backwards. And what that does is it just gives you a little bit of protection, gives that stem a little bit of protection so that if a tooth or something gets in there, it doesn't cut and unravel that whole fly. So, all right. Now what we can do, this stage of the game, it's completely optional. If you want to add Pec Fins to your fly, now would be the time that I like to do that. We're going to finish this fly with a brush for the head, but I'm going to lay in a couple of Pec Fins right on the side before we do that and finish her up. So if you want to do that, now's the time to do it. Not really a necessary step, but I think it adds just one more trigger to the fly. You can kind of use really anything you want there. I just have this kind of grizzly saddle laying around, and it looks cool, so we're going to tie a couple of these guys in on the side. Kind of do a couple of loose wraps, and just to kind of trap that feather, and then you can take and kind of pull that stem if you need to, you know, adjust the length of that fin. But all right, that looks pretty good. Move on to the other side here real quick. And now we're going to finish her up with a brush. A lot of different options out there as far as brushes go. On this smaller fly, I've kind of landed upon the 1-inch streamer brush from our distribution. It's a kind of a good mix just between flash. I like the density. It sheds water really well. So it is a smaller fly, so I like to keep it nice and light. You know, if I want to make sure I can throw this with a 6 weight, or if a client's fishing it, they can throw it all day and not get worn out. So these streamer brushes in 1-inch do a great job. Kind of pick whatever color you want. We're just going to do kind of a hot head here. We're going to finish her up with some chartreuse, which is always a good choice. All right. Change of plans. There's a little bit too much room on there, so we're going to add one more station of feathers. And if you didn't want to finish it with a brush, you don't have to. I like to throw it in there. It just kind of gives the fly, I think, a little more texture and dimension, and it also, I think, gives the fly a little bit, allows the fly to put off a little more vibration and water push. So the brush also accepts eyes really well. So if you want to epoxy or resin in some eyes on this fly too, the brush does a little bit better job taking 3D eyes than the feathers do. So you can see sometimes when you finish these flies off with the brushes, you can trap some of these fibers in here. A really quick and easy way to get rid of those is to take a lighter, and after you glue or resin that thread head, just take that lighter and hold it right up to the eye, and it'll clean everything right up for you. But all right, we'll add a little bit of super glue and we are done. Another hour-long tutorial in the books. Promise Dev, this one was only going to be 30 minutes, but all right. That is it. That is the mini feather jerk changer. So tie a few up. They're killer in the lower water of summer, but just super fun fly to fish. If you haven't tied any of the jerk changers, I would highly recommend tying some up. And check out the video below where Blaine talks about his jerk changer, but it's just an awesome platform. It kind of adds an exciting new twist to the Game Changer platform. So thanks for watching and sitting through this tutorial. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and smash that like button. And if you have any questions, be sure to reach out to us at the shop. Thanks for watching.
If you like this video, hit subscribe. It helps out a lot. And check out these videos. We think you might like them too.